Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to rewrite the Superman myth. You guys know Superman, the whole mythology, and so Superman for me is an immigrant kid. Superman was like he was America's quintessential immigrant. Like, he crash lands in the middle of Kansas. You know, he's from another world. They find him. He thinks he's human, and then he discovers he's not. You know, but whatever. And I always thought it was real interesting because Superman as a myth, you know, he comes out in the 30s, this is when he's created. He's kind of a peculiar version of American like optimism, which is that somebody would actually show up to your world or your place, but who's like 5 million times stronger than you, right? Like endlessly powerful, but he would be very helpful and very kind. But you know, from a Dominican experience, a kid from an island, and from where I grew up, if somebody showed up in my neighborhood in New Jersey and he was 5 million times stronger than the rest of us, that dude would enslave us. The two dudes who wrote Superman, who invented Superman, were obsessed with a story that was written by the guy who created Tarzan. The dude who created Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs, wrote a different set of books they're basically called the John Carter of Mars series. Has anybody ever read John Carter?
I read one book when I was like 10.
Yeah.
I really liked it.
Well, it's actually the Superman story, and these guys just jacked it. And what John Carter of Mars was that an American Civil War veteran is fighting Indians in Arizona and gets forced, because of a firefight, shooting dudes, gets forced into a strange cave. And when he goes through the cave, he comes out of the cave, and on the other side, he's on Mars. And like, this was written in 1912, and he's on Mars where there's oxygen, people can live. The way people thought about Mars in 1912, they thought the canals had people on them. And so it's Mars, but the difference is this guy comes out of the cave, and he's Superman. He's 5,000 times more powerful, and he's exactly who the Superman character is based on. You know, and I realized I can't retell the Superman legend because everybody knows it so well, but I can retell the John Carter legend, which created Superman, because nobody knows it. You guys should look at each other's pieces when you're looking at them, yeah? And literally circle on every story, circle the places where the person builds the world. The thing is, look, for those of you who've read this book, look, we could strip it down to basically, I successfully built a world. I mean, that's really what you're about. You know, and I think that as a writer, and this will help you guys, you know, I make my writers always do that. I'm like, circle where the world gets built. Where do we get information about this world? And usually most of you guys take for granted, including me, that we know the world. And we'll look through 10 pages and there'll not be a single description of this world.
Yeah, well, Zoe's going to be teaching us on that real quick.
Yeah.
Well, I want you to learn it, because I think if you do it, I always tell my students, one detail per half page. And this is what makes your comments are very valuable, is that people will follow you to hell if they believe that the hand that's holding them, that's guiding them, knows what it's doing. And readers jump out of your stories because they don't feel like you're really a good guy. You know? And to be a guide, you got to give the sort of details that give people confidence. People don't exist in our brains outside of relationships. And as writers, what you describe is, of course, what they look like, what they do, but most effectively, if you describe their relationships you're in. And so Oscar, in this book, for those of you who've read it, Oscar begins not just as a fat Dominican herb, a nerd who doesn't get asked. Oscar begins as the brother of this very ferocious, beautiful girl who had been raped when she was young, and of a mother who had also, we find out later, been raped repeatedly when she was young, and a mother who's terribly controlling, protective, doesn't put up with any bullshit, with no father in sight, and Oscar's best friend is a cheating, lying, condescending bastard. And that's how Oscar gets defined. And so I would argue, if you're going to work on characters, always work on the relationships. Remember, classical structure. Yeah? If I just describe mine and your relationship, harder to see. In other words, just describing me is the hardest to see. Describing mine and your relationship, easier but not perfect. Describing a relationship that exists in a triangle, perfect, easy to see. And a perfect triangle would be my relationship with you now, yeah, but my relationship with you 6 months ago. Because that past me is a different character. Triangle, perfect.
I'm struggling with how much do I divulge, how much do I hold back.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Sure. You know, ever heard the term titration? Like chemical term? When you titrate something, it's like when you take like a dropper and you doot, 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 you release it, you know, a little bit at a time. I think these things are always require titration, which means that you see how much it can hold and how much it can't. So for example, I have versions, just give you a totally random example that's not emotional. With this book, I have chapters where I cranked up the level of Spanish and Black English that I grew up in. And other chapters where I cranked it down because I was trying to see how much the language could withstand. It's like beta testing a car or a rocket. And if it was too far, it would fly apart. The English couldn't sustain it. If it was too little, the English would just dissolve it, you know? And I think the question would be to titrate this. Try it at an extreme, try it subtle, try it in the middle, and then go from there. And then try other strategies. I would have a strategy about when my best friend found out that his child was abused, where you remove it one. You're telling a story about somebody who you live with that this happened to. And you keep trying these different strategies, you guys. My name is Junot Diaz. This is the foreword for Brothers in the Pen, 6 cubic feet. One can understand why so many of us out in the world would rather not hear the voices from within our prison system. After all, ours is a society that is still not sussed out a humane way to administer justice or to enable rehabilitation. As anyone who has had any involvement will tell you, our carceral system is by any estimation deeply flawed and at times impossibly cruel. Summoning the will, however, political or otherwise, for comprehensive reform is a Sisyphean struggle. Many sectors rely on the prison system for income, for electoral margins, and these vested interests do not wish to see the current system changed. And given the political climate, what politician would dare to broach the subject? As for the public, well, the public in the main does not want to see the system change. For change first requires assessment, and assessment would mean we would eventually have to listen to people that we have grown long used to not listening. We on the outside fear those voices, those behind bar voices, not simply because they are the voices of criminals, because among these voices are men and women who have committed often shocking crimes against our society. We fear those voices because of what they will tell us about our nation and because of what they will tell us about ourselves. As a society, we luxuriate in the belief that we are good, and this good could mask a perverse, unreasoning desire to punish, a fundamental lack of compassion when it comes to those behind bars. By keeping the prison system as far away from us as possible, we can maintain the myth of our unvarnished goodness without having to examine the reality of our almost medieval need to see others punished. We can play at being good without ever actually having to live up to those standards. To heed the voices within our prison system as a society would mean that we would learn things about ourselves we would otherwise prefer to keep locked up. And in learning these things, we would change not only our societal system, but our deepest selves. It is perhaps too early to hope for such impossible things, and as some would have it, perhaps it is too late. I still believe that despite all the ills of our species, one day the change will come, the change that will make us truly the good beings we claim to be, beings that do not fear voices from the margin, but who welcome them. Until that impossible day comes, let these stories, poems, these testimonies, these songs from behind bars serve ever to remind us of the people we are all locking up, men and women who are, for all they have done and has been done to them, our brothers and our sisters. Let these writings serve ever to remind us of the distance we have yet to travel as a society, as a race. Let these words keep us company, let them comfort us, let them guide us and teach us and warn us and scold us. Let these words remind us of who we are and who we could be until that astonishing day dawns when we are ready to take that first step out of darkness and into light. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
All right.